we can start our VMAC Forum today. Thank you for everyone for joining, and we are so honored to have Joy Chen and Eugenia Kim to be our speakers today. Joyce is a time-based media arts conservator, and Eugenia is a creator and researcher of multimedia. So I'm Angel. I'm the programs manager of Video Touch and also the moderator today for you. So for the better flow of the conversation, if there is no one need interpretation from English to Chinese, we will have the whole VMAC Forum in English. 要是今天大家也听得懂英语的话，那么我们便不需要国语的传译。要是这样的话，那么我们进度可以比较快一点。要是有需要的话，请取片在那个 chat box 里面提出，谢谢。不然的话，我们现在可以开始。So let's okay, if there is no special need regarding the language, let's have Joyce to start her presentation first. Joyce, as I just said, Joyce is a time-based media arts conservator. She used to work in the Amplus Museum in Hong Kong, and now she's back in Taiwan and working as a freelance media art conservator. And she also wrote a lot of interesting and inspired articles about conservation of time-based art. And this time she will tell us more about like preservation and extended reality. Thank you, Joyce.
大家可以看到我的荧幕吗 ？Angel OK 吗 ？OK 好。首先非常感谢 Angel 的这边的邀请哦。那其实今天主要会跟大家聊一聊的是，我在2018年的时候作为科技艺术典藏基础计划的主持人的时候，我们所做的一个试图要去使用虚拟实境技术，但是又某种程度上想要探讨作品的保存的一个特展的计划。那关于说虚拟实境到底怎么保存这一块，那其实我自己个人在实务上面是都还没有碰过，包含说各大美术馆其实真正有在开始典藏虚拟实境的案例非常的少，大部分是以国外的，譬如说像是 Tate 跟 MoMA 这样子很大型的美术馆为主。那最后的时候也可以稍微的跟大家稍微聊聊这个部分。那我自己的背景其实从来就不是以一个修复师的身份被养成，那其实这跟很多早期的媒体修复师的状况是很类似的。那我本身是数位媒体设计再加上 Museum Study 这两个背景结合而成。那后来加上说，到了国外实习，然后遇到了一些在像是 Digital Archivist 这样子的工作职位上，然后渐渐的养成了自己，我要成为一位实际媒体艺术的保存维护师这样子的状况。那科技艺术典藏基础计划呢，其实是2018年开始，那个时候我和等一下会跟大家介绍的 partner， 我们都在台湾最大的美术馆，也就是国立台湾美术馆工作。那其实在一个机构里面工作，未必我们能够很直接的去接触到媒体艺术保存这件事情，但是却是在这个过程当中，我们认识了台湾的数位艺术基金会。那基金会也协助我们去做了一些所谓 side project 这样子的内容，而成立了科技艺术典藏基础计划。这个计划作为一个想要去探讨典藏，其实是有点不是这么名正言顺啦。那我的意思是说，这是一个没有自己的收藏的计划，也就是说，我们其实是不断的去透过，譬如说刚刚 Angel 提到的撰写一些文章等等的。那比较有趣的是，也就是今天要跟大家分享的，我们最一开始其实并没有实际的去讨论怎么典藏一件 VR 的作品，因为那时候其实并不存在一个 VR 的作品能够让我们去典藏，而是我们去讨论怎么利用VR 来更扩充的去探讨作品典藏的一些延伸性的问题。 那另外也跟大家一定要介绍到的是我的 partner。那其实我的 partner 我们是大学同学，但大学的时候超级不熟，就是也都几乎没有一起工作过。然后后来在职场上相遇以后，不约而同的都掉进了这个媒体艺术跟数位资讯保存的这个领域当中。那他目前人是在德国，但我们一直都是用线上的方式在持续的做计划的执行。OK。那这样我们就来到今天的这个主题。那这个主题呢，其实是2018年在由台湾数位艺术中心里面的概念美术馆所展出的穿越光墙 Archive or Alive 这个展览。那先给大家一点关于概念美术馆的概念。那概念美术馆是台湾数位艺术中心在2018年这个新成立的单位里面所另外设立的一个美术馆。但这个美术馆其实它跟我们传统所想象的美术馆很不一样。它本身如果过去各位稍微有点听过的话，它是一个以虚拟实境技术为主要的创作载体的一个美术馆。那虽然说表面上看起来很像只是在展出虚拟实境的作品，但实际上当初成立的时候是由我跟基金会的艺术总监，我们讨论出希望能够去探索特别是媒体艺术作品、装置艺术作品，它可能在历史脉络中的真实性。那什么意思呢？也就是是不是有可能透过虚拟实境来讨论过去我们很重视一个以 tangible 的物质典藏方式的不足，而且这个典藏方式还必须要考量到的是一个我们现在在数位时代的观众的一个需求。那在这样子的背景脉络之下，就产生了概念美术馆，也产生了概念美术馆的第一个展览。那这边我也选了几件目前就是从概念美术馆2018年创立到现在总共已经展出了10档展览。那其实中间有非常多不一样的类型，它未必是直接探讨作品的保存或者 archive 这个面向，也有很多大家图片上可以看到有结合不同的装置，或者是说用一个让观众发现原来他在虚拟实境里面所看到影像是在现实的某个场域里面这样子的状态。那今天也稍微点到一下这一件，就是在今天要讲的这个展览之后所展出的这个刘守耀的独舞的数位典藏。那我记得他在应该是2020年还是2019年的时候，也曾经到香港有去简单的巡回跟发表过。那由于这个专案本身并不是由我所执行的，但我想说应该或许有兴趣的观众可以在后续的去寻找资料。那他本身就是比较关注在刘守耀这一位舞蹈家他的一些肢体的动作以及即兴表演的记录这一块。好，那回到穿越光墙 Archive or Alive 这个展览，那这个展览其实本身是刻意的去选择了陶雅伦老师他在2009年台北数位艺术中心开幕的时候的终结历史之光这件作品作为一个概念发想的雏形，以及我们试图用 VR 去重现它在当时这个历史脉络中的作品的形式。好，那我现在放一段当初的影片。未来的科技实验室提供专业模式使用，朝向研发文化创意产业的方向来发展。记者孙瑶、陈保罗台北报道。好。刚刚很短的给大家看到的是我们在试图挖掘这一件作品的任何的记录的时候，找到了唯一的一个公开的记录影片。那片段就是这么的短。那虽然说刚开始我们看到，其实发现它能够提供的资讯非常的少，但实际上我们后来有发现，这么简短的资讯其实给了我们很重要的一些线索。好，那所以这整个计划简单说可以描述成必须要使用 VR， 然后必须要去重现终结历史之光这件作品， 当初这件作品并不是在 VR 里面所展出的，它是在一个现场的空间当中。那在扣紧着科技艺术典藏基础计划的精神，我们假设的一个命题是，如果说这件作品即将被一个美术馆所典藏的话，那我们要去了解什么东西？所以其实在这个时间点，我们并没有特别的去思考到说它要进到 VR 里面这件事情。那首先它是一个现地制作的作品，那它里面的光墙等等的空间是被机械所表演出来的，那它还包含了光墙以及烟雾等等的这些无形的物件。那但是呢，对于我们执行者来说，其实最大的挑战是说，就不论是我，或者是说我的伙伴，以及参与制作的工程师，我们从来都没有在2009年的时候看过那件作品的原作，从来没有进过那个现场的空间。那接着还有就是，其实在2009年的时候，所谓的360的摄像机、摄影机并不是这么普及。所以并没有留下一个能够完整记录整个空间的影像。再加上说这个作品在展出以后，其实就只被展出过那么一次，就没有在其他地方再被展出过了。好，那 anyway，由于我们的目标其实是试着想要去演练到底一个作品如果被美术馆典藏的话要做的一个流程，所以第一件事情其实就是我们要去了解这件作品到底是什么，以及艺术家所创造它的一个意图。那汤浩伦老师他其实是台湾非常早期就开始接触科技媒介，而且他并没有说一直创造现在大部分可能很多人会停在录像这样的一个媒介，但他其实从很早期开始就一直跟着技术的演进，然后不断在改变他所使用的媒介。但不管说从2009年一直到现在也好，他所有的作品其实在探讨的一直都是这些科技怎么带来观众对于虚与实的空间的认知以及身体的认知这件事情，是贯穿他所有的创作的。那如果我们再聚焦到老师跟光线有关的作品的话，最早其实是可以回溯到2009年的这一件零度意识这件作品，但是很快的呢，老师就舍弃了这样子的白光。那他选择绿光的原因其实他说是因为他觉得绿光看起来更加的暴力。那我这边也有一小段其中一件作品。那我们其实就是透过这样子过去的档案资料的挖掘，试着要去要在我们脑中去建立这件作品《终结历史之光》到底是什么样子的形象。那接着在2008年，老师就开始把他的光线改成了这个绿光。那这个部分呢，这件作品则是比较单纯的，只使用了单一的雷射光机，叫做 rotation of the light wall。那我们也是从这个照片当中去大概知道说这个光墙所形成的一个样貌大概是什么样子的质感。那以及老师也用不同的旋转的形式来创造不同的光面。一直到前面这个部分，其实都是我们试着在探索艺术家这整个系列的创作脉络，以及为什么作品最后会来到像是《终结历史之光》这件作品的一个创作的脉络的原因。那如果我们回来谈到这件作品的话，那其实在保存维护界常常会用到一个词，也就是 significant element。那这个词其实在媒体艺术保存、当代艺术保存跟装置艺术保存里面是非常重要的，也就是一件作品在入场的时候，我们需要去判断说哪些是这件作品缺一不可、必须的元素。那这个元素其实就会成为未来作品在展示的时候，包含说入场的时候，你要跟艺术家沟通清楚，要能够纳入的收藏的 element。对。那但是呢，以这件作品来讲，我们首先知道的是这个场域是重要的，因为它作为一个开幕特展，它的场域以历史性来讲是重要的。再来就是我们知道它是由3座雷射光机所组成的，那雷射光机本身也需要有烟雾机的存在，才有办法让这个光墙能够产生。 那再加上光墙本身这个运动的轨迹，以及有一个另外一位艺术家所制作的背景的声音。那我们最后后续在访谈的时候也了解到说，其实老师本身是很希望观众能够跟这些自动编程的光墙有一些身体上面的互动。但实际上呢，我们回来看看我们收到的资料夹里面的档案，虽然说图片很小，但我想大家稍微看一下就可以发现，几乎都拍一样的东西，然后没有捕捉到太多，譬如说空间的细节啊等等的。那大部分其实都是拍单一个观众的互动的状态。那这其实会造成我们这些从来没有体验过作品的人，在试图建立这个作品的形象的一些断面跟断层。对，那在这个状况下，其实我们也没有办法，就只能接受这样子的状况。但是呢，蛮幸运的是，大家可以看到现在画面中左边的那张图，是我们在老师的其中一个很不起眼的 Word 档案当中发现的图片。那当时这个图片也没有多做太多的说明。那我们后来也知道说，它其实就是3座光机所摆放的位置，以及旋转的图板。可是这个图板其实接下来并没有说明的是图板的旋转的顺序以及速率。那这个时候，其实前面那一段新闻所记录的片段，让我们了解到旋转的速率大概是什么样子。对，虽然说它只是这么短短的一小段。那右边这块则是我们去取得了台北数位艺术中心1楼的楼地板面积以后，然后试着去稍微配置到底雷射光机跟烟机所在的位置是什么样子。但后来我们并没有将这个图片很直接的使用在我们接下来 VR 内容的制作当中。好。那其实在我们前面做完了这样子有点像是考古的历史调查以后，我们准备了这些资料，然后来向艺术家进行访谈。那同样的，我们访谈目的一样是想要访你一种我们如果要收藏这件作品怎么办。对，所以我们的前2题的内容其实会很着重在于说，了解艺术家的创作意图跟他所选择的媒材和这些光墙的移动轨迹之间的原因是什么。那了解这个原因，才有办法在后续无论是用什么样子的媒材在转译也好，在展示的时候也好，让未来的展示人员能够知道要做什么样子的材料上的取舍。因为只要是机械的、媒体的、科技的东西，它所面临的汰换的时间，其实是比我们传统物质媒材都还要快的很多。对，那第二个呢，也是透过老师到底怎么创作这个过程的深度的理解，去了解到说，那这中间到底展示上有什么需要记录的部分。那在这部分，其实老师有讲一个蛮有趣的故事啦，就是说，因为他那个雷射光机的旋转是他自己去改的。然后他在测试的时候，他都要拿一个东西，就这样挡在前面，然后超怕光机飞出来，然后撞到自己，然后结果就新闻上就出现艺术家身故在家中之类的这种状况。那其实这些像这样子的访谈内容是一般如果我们是比较是一个创作脉络啊，或者是一般的艺评所需要的访谈，其实不太会挖掘到这个部分。那这也是我自己个人在作为一个修复师，然后去跟艺术家做关于技术的访谈的时候，会得知的一些很有趣的一些幕后的内容吧。对。那接着我们也问了老师说，他对于后来终结历史之光那一场展览，就是满意度到底是如何？那最后呢，由于老师当时也刚好在创作一些跟虚拟实境有关的展览，所以也就很开放性的问他对于这整个计划的想法到底是什么。那我们得到了一些蛮有趣的结论。第一个是，要不是数位艺术中心邀请他来展览，其实他根本不会做一个这么 fancy 的作品。所谓 fancy 的意思是，为什么要3个光墙，然后还这样旋转呢？对。那第二个是，那至于其实延续了第一个，他其实对于最后展出的那个成果本身是不满意的。那不满意的原因就是因为空间太大了。 然后他已经很努力的放了2座烟机，但是还是没有办法在这个每天6、7、8个小时的展览期间，能够好好的让这些光墙在够浓密的烟雾下面被完美的生成这样子。那最后他也提到说，其实是因为现实的限制，如果说这些机器都能够不在，会是最好的。对，那其实这3点，对我们来说，其实会成为接下来在策划 VR 内容的时候很重要的一个指引。对，但是前2个指引呢，其实就带给了我们一开始在思考 VR 内容到底要做什么的时候一个分歧点吧。对，那个分歧点跟辩论就来自于我们的 curation decision making 到底是要偏向这个概念，还是说是要偏向这个历史脉络。那这张图片，大家如果看到那个星星的部分，代表着是假设以刚刚老师说他不希望烟机是出现的，但是如果我们依循的历史脉络，希望观众知道烟机曾经存在，那以历史来说，那这个烟机就必须要存在于这个虚拟实境的空间里面。但如果我们纯然只是想要展示一个概念跟这个历史空间的一个状态的话，实际上那个烟机跟雷射光机可以是不用存在的。那我们其实后来的成果是取了一个折中的点，对。那这是第一个策划上的考量。那第2个策划上的考量就有包含说，我们还要去考量，怎么将2009年这么大的空间，观众的体验能够凝缩到2018年的时候，概念美术馆它实际观众的身体能够移动的空间其实只有3×3公尺。要怎么去调配这个部分？那当然后来我们使用的方式是观众能够走这个3×3，但是他的视觉是可以看到更远的地方的。但当然观众就只能在我们所设定好的那个空间里面做移动跟体验。那再来就是在使用者的体验这部分，只要进到 VR 就还要去考虑的是观众的体验的时间长度、舒适度以及整个节奏怎么拿捏这个部分。那加上最后呢，为了要让现场空间看起来越接近真实，我们也需要做一些对于现实空间的一些，其实在虚拟空间并不需要，但是为了让它看起来更真的一些拟仿，譬如说烟雾的样子，以及灯光的倒影等等的。那接下来我们收集了这些资讯，然后也做了策展的决定以后，就进到了 VR 的制作。那我想大家可能大概都知道说，目前 VR 的制作大概就是分这2种。那以我们来说，不可能选择右边那种，虽然我们也很希望有一个现场的360的记录，但其实也刚好我们后来也就是选择了直接透过3D 制作的软体，然后重新建制了这样子一个空间。那通常我们会称呼为这个叫做 6 degree of freedom， 你能够在这个空间里面，观众能够自由的去有某种程度上的移动，然后和物件进行互动等等的。那其实透由直接建模的方式也保留了观众其实实际能够在里面跟光墙进行互动这个本来作品就想要表达的一个很重要的元素。那这个部分其实还蛮标准的，也就是我们从已知的资讯进到3D 的建模，再进到 Unity 里面去做制作，然后最后有了一个 prototype 以后，实际戴上头盔，然后再不断的进行 final 的 adjustment， 然后最后来进行展出这样子。那我想我这个地方就很快的给大家带过看一下我们所使用的软体的规格，然后3D 建模的部分，以及光墙的运动的轨迹。然后比较值得一提的是，后来我们跟工程师讨论，我们实在很不希望让观众带任何其他的装置。那所以正好那时候有一个叫 Leap Motion 的 的 device， 然后它可以让观众不需要带着任何的东西，但是你实际上可以看到你手的移动。那我们就直接把它装在这个头显的正前方，表示说当你的手进到你的视线的时候，其实你的手就会很自然的出现在空间里面。对，那我们接着也加入了烟雾的这个例子，那这蛮有趣的啊，因为其实如果依照VR 的这个3D 数位世界来说，生成一个光墙完全不需要这些粒子，所以一开始工程师在做的时候，并没有把这些粒子考虑进去。但是我们带上了显示器进到 prototype 在看的时候，就发现就是怎么怪，就是非常的怪。后来才加入了这个烟雾的粒子，然后才发现说，其实当我们在做从已知的一些现场的资讯转移到虚拟空间的时候，并非是1:1的直接的模拟。那这中间其实要考量到非常多观众对于何谓现实的认知，以及数位转译的这个部分的细节。那直接给大家看我们最后的成果。我想大家看完成果，其实我自己那时候自己最后体验完是有发现，因为其实我是一位会玩电脑游戏的人，就如果以一个 gamer 的角度来看，就会觉得这个空间看起来袅袅的，然后其实没有什么总之它就是一个 prototype 到不行的 prototype 这样子，对，但是我们从一开始就并没有就知道说以整个基金会能和科技艺术典藏基础计划能够所支持的人力时间跟成本，然后还有技术的资源等等的并不是我们没有办法达到一个更精致的程度，而是说其实我们主要想要探讨的目标并不是要做一个非常照相写实化的一个拟仿。那所以我们一开始就设定说，我们只要看到观众在未经过任何刻意的引导的状况下，他有随着影像跟整个体验做出一些肢体上面的动作，对我们来说就算成功了。那其实这个大家从照片上看到，这其实真的就是观众带上了进到这个虚拟空间以后，他们很自然所产生的一个反应。所以对于我们来说，这样子的成果确实是捕捉了终结历史之光这件作品一开始创作的概念，以及它在过去的那个台北数位艺术中心中空间的一个象征性的样貌，这一点部分是有达成的。那很快的也带到一个简单的结论了。那我觉得我们这一次的专案其实可能跟其他在做 VR 制作的专案蛮不一样的，是说我们把目标重视在整个过程，而非结果。所以结果比较像是，我们先做完了以后，我们再来看看我们做的这个东西，之于原作来说，它到底是什么。那也加上说，其实前两个结论比较像是，假设一件媒体艺术作品，之于许多的美术馆来说，要让它有机会能够再被讨论，让它有机会能够再被去和艺术家接触，去讨论作品当时的创作概念是什么，采用的媒材是什么。除非你告诉艺术家说我要为你做一个展览，不然其实现实状况是艺术家大部分不太会理你。但虚拟实境的制作，它可以是一个小规模的，也可以是一个大规模的。我们只要一开始设定好观众是谁，那所以在这次的过程当中，我们可以我自己会把它看成是一个开启和艺术家讨论他的作品 的一个策略。那另外一点是，我们也发现，其实透过这个过程，我跟伙伴，我们原本从来没有体验过这件作品的，但是经过艺术家访谈，经过了很多的影像给予我们的脑补之后，最后生成了这个可以称呼是档案的具象化跟这些社会观众记忆的具象化，它确实是有可能去扩张未来作为这类型的艺术作品记录上面的更多的一个多角化的可能性。那最后一点算是我自己从艺术作品保存跟典藏的这个角度去思考的，因为等一下也会很快跟大家提到说虚拟实境作品的保存目前在实务上通常是怎么做，但其实软体艺术它就是属于软体的一种。那我们是不是要去接受说这类型的作品即使它成为典藏了，它就是有寿命有可能终结的一天，但是它寿命终结以后是不是能够转化为另外一种 archive 的形式再被讨论出来，我们不需要再这么的其实在保存的伦理上面会希望一直去探索何谓最完整的，何谓最真实的那个作品。那其实从我们跟老师访谈的过程当中也会得知到一点是，对老师来说其实终结历史之光并不是一个完成的作品。对，那会变成说如果这件作品被典藏了，那我们到底在典藏什么，这样子的一个问题。好，那最后展览当天我们也就问了老师他到底怎么看这整个展览啊，但蛮有趣的是他又说其实他认为虚拟实境用于如果用他当年创作这一系列雷射光作品的同样的概念为出发的话，他觉得虚拟实境是反而更好的一个创作媒介。但第二点是但他也承认说这次所在 VR 世界里面所呈现出来的这个内容并不能取代原作本身，可是它确实可以代表是来自于同一个概念以及来自于同一个历史的一种呈现方式。对，那其实当老师讲出这句话的时候，我们就依稀的开始好像抓到了一点线索，去回应概念美术馆一开始所成立的初衷，也就是怎么有一种属于概念的收藏以及去物质化的典藏，并且面向的是数位时代的观众这样子。那最后很简单的稍微提一下，我目前知道国外有在直接的去处理虚拟实境这个完整的作品怎么保存这件事情，大概就是澳洲的VMAC， 然后还有英国的 Tate， 他们做比较多。那我们会以一个软体艺术的角度去看它。那从 analysis 那边主要做的事情跟我刚刚跟大家所分享的前面那一段在做的事情是非常相像的，但是接下来就会进到的是到底要 collect 什么。你 collect 其实就是以一整个软体的封包，然后其实这也会牵扯到这件作品到底有牵扯到多不同层面的技术。那有一些如果还加入了网络或者是说不同 database 的注入的话，那会更复杂。但是呢，不断在做的其实就是一个 migrate 跟 maintain 的一个过程。那这个过程当中会不断的去制作 iteration 的 documentation 跟 versioning 这件事情。但是以目前从开始有 VR 到 VR 成为典藏品到 VR 的保存怎么被讨论，我自己觉得这个时间轴还不够长。不够长的意思是说，我们还没有办法去预测到说，到底右边这个 collect 到 migrate 到 maintain 的这个回圈，经过了几圈以后，会不会其实就不再是原本的作品了？因为技术提供者永远会控制你的内容能够产生的一个限制性，或甚至是说有些事情你永远就都做不到了。也就回到我前面提到说，我们是不是要在保存伦理上面要去接受媒体艺术作品它就会有生命终结的一天。对，那所以简单来说，这个计划 本身跟虚拟实境的保存没有直接的关系，但我们其实是透过这个过程，然后试着去碰触非常多在许多的博物馆、美术馆机构在宣称典藏跟保存媒体艺术作品的时候，当中所产生的一些或许不是这么切实际的一些问题。那我的简报大概分享到这边。
谢谢 Joyce. Thank you, Joyce, for the informative and amazing presentation. 现在我们可以把时间交给 Eugenia 给她的 presentation. Now we'll pass the time to Eugenia for her presentation. Thank you, Eugenia.
All right, hello everyone, and thank you to Videotage for this opportunity. And also I'm very excited now because I realized that in Joyce's presentation, there's a lot of overlapping concepts and other ideas. And actually she covered a lot of things that I was worried about not covering. So I feel much better now because I feel like I can speak a little more freely then. For lack of a better explanation, what you'll see is sort of a reflection of the messiness and confusion in my own mind. And the reason being is that at this point in my life, I cannot separate what I do in my work from my lived experience. The two are a little bit too intertwined. And I think, as you can see here, you can see a sort of trajectory of how I developed. So in one corner, you see the very typical classical ballet student, all excited to dance. And then you can see sort of this change into a more contemporary dance style. And then going from the physical world into the virtual world. And then to the point where just completely getting rid of the human body and only leaving behind movement. I think that summarizes basically my journey and what I will talk about today. So if you have not guessed by now, I mainly started out as a dancer, at least when I was a child. And the point of this slide is to show how one's self-identification changes based on your approach to your work. So basically, when I was growing up, I have no idea of any context. So I just called myself a dancer, a musician, an artist. And then as I started going through training where I had to combine several skill sets at once into a single project, I identified more as sort of a creator. So choreographer, composer, designer, that kind of thing. And I put martial artist in there just because I think what a lot of people don't realize is that there really is an art to martial arts. And a lot of the concepts that you learn in the creative arts are used in the martial arts. And at the same time, concepts from the martial arts come back into the creative arts. So it was actually quite a major influence in how I approached the creative arts. And so I call that period a multidisciplinary period because I was combining skill sets, but not really making the connections between the different disciplines. And then after that, I went through this other period where my CV basically says technologist, archivist, librarian, director, because I had a company in the US. And in case you're wondering at this point, wait, how is this person doing so many things and changing so many times? In the 90s and 2000 to 2010, that 20-year period in the US, it was very common in the US for people to be studying multiple things at the same time, to work 3 jobs, to reinvent themselves every 2 or 3 years. I used to work at a library where this amazing woman, she had worked in investment banking and then become an archivist. But she was also a world champion of Latin ballroom dance at the age of 50. And, you know, now she's moved on and she's the director of a whole unit at the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. That's the kind of place the US is. And so I think it's actually even scarier now. I look at Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and I go, wow, I cannot keep up with the young people there anymore. I really can't. So in any case, I call that period interdisciplinary because now I'm starting to understand how what I do as a technologist affects the decisions I made as a digital archivist, and how what I did as a digital archivist affected my choices as the director for a dance company. Now it's starting to connect a little better. But then in the last 5 years, you will see that I just stopped referring by discipline. And now I call myself things based on the actions that I do. And that's just because at this point, I never know exactly what I'm going to do and in what context I'm going to do it in. So what that means is that as new definitions emerge, that means more change. And I think this is for everybody. And I think a good place to start is just with some basic words. I have been finding that archives, preservation, conservation, curation, these simple words can mean very different things based on who you are talking to, where they come from in terms of their educational and professional background. When I first started as a PhD student in 2017, I was very confused because I was still holding very strongly onto the definitions from the Society of American Archivists. And the reason for that is if you're an archivist or a librarian in the US, pretty much everything is regulated by the Society of American Archivists and the American American Library Association, ALA. Everything they say, you know, that's the truth. You must follow that. So during the period that I was working in archives and libraries, in some ways things were simpler. You know, processing means this, appraising means that. If you're in digital preservation, you must use mets and mods for your metadata schemas. No questions. I know they've changed a little, but at that time, you know, everybody was saying, in order to make a digital repository, it must be Fedora, or else you are not good enough. It was that kind of time. And I think it was interesting when I stepped out of that world much later to realize that in the rest of the world, everybody else had been coming up with their own meanings for these terms. So even today, I find that I have to be very careful depending on the environment I'm in, because if I'm in a meeting of the Dance Heritage Coalition, I know that chances are they will be using these definitions. But then if I'm in IZEA, I've discovered they are maybe not, which is fine, but just trying to remember to switch my brain. And now, as I go into other worlds, I'm having to change my definitions even more. Likewise, I've noticed that there's some confusion about what does it mean to be cross, multi, inter, trans, etc. disciplinary. And I just bring this up because I do think it's important to be aware of the differences because they do affect one's approach. And so the reason why I use transdisciplinary is because most of my work is now moving more and more into an area that goes, is there a societal problem that I wish to address with this work or research? Who else is involved? Is it automatically using computing technology? Is it possibly leading to the development of a new interdiscipline? There are some very interesting and wonderful people who have been researching all of this since the 1950s, actually even earlier. So I will not go into too much detail. But basically, all I mean to say is, at least for myself, when I say that I'm transdisciplinary, yes, basically that I'm interested in things that have some sort of societal impact, that I will be just as likely to be reading science articles as I will be arts articles. And that sometimes what ends up resulting ends up going beyond the existing boundaries of disciplines. And so all of this is sort of to help explain my trajectory, because as you might have also gotten a sense, at any given time, I feel like I am living maybe, I don't know, 2 to 5 different lives at once. And so these are just 2 of the streams. And as you can see, what happens is at the beginning, you see sort of a problem. And then you see at the end how I chose to resolve that problem. And so in terms of digital dance preservation research, that started because as a choreographer and a student of multimedia, so like animation and electronic music, I realized I had no idea how to document my own work. And I had no idea how to get access to my own to the documentation that other people were making of this work. And now I'm very happy to say that different organizations are doing all sorts of wonderful workshops and tutorials and things like that, all sorts of training for artists who wish to do more with their own work. But what I've been also, but at that time, so this would have been early 2000s. They are not teaching this at the universities. They are not teaching this in conservatory. They are just not teaching it. So I ended up deciding to study computer science and also going to library school to teach myself how to do this. And then I discovered actually, oh, there's all these libraries and universities and other people who have been studying this for decades. And my life could have been easier. But then once I started working, I discovered a rather frightening situation, at least for myself, which is that the understanding of what an archive or a library had of a creator's needs, and then what a creator actually needs, like so an artist or a producer or something else, were not always matching. And sometimes it could not match just because there's not enough money, not enough space, not enough people. And I think my favorite example of this was when I was at Purdue University. The dance department there actually had a really interesting history, including doing some of the earliest VR and motion capture dance pieces. Now, you have to understand, that's like saying that HKUST had a dance department, and that dance department was like multimedia dance pioneers. It was kind of a little bit unheard of at the time. But because nobody in the university had thought about really preserving or archiving their work, all of their work had been sort of hidden for years. Like the engineering departments had gotten all the credit because they had just considered those projects as engineering projects, not really dance or art projects. So at first I thought I had an easy answer, but then I realized technology kept moving too quickly. So in 2012, it was already rare and a real luxury for choreographers to video record every rehearsal. And then by 2015, everybody was recording every rehearsal. And now I've discovered that all these dancers on YouTube are editing their own footage beautifully. That's in a 10-year period, that's very fast. So these days, when I speak to groups like the Dance Heritage Coalition, it's a little bit tricky because those archives and libraries are they still have a lot of old video to deal with. Like they still have to digitize film. They still have to deal with paper collections. If I mention, so all those interesting projects that Wayne McGregor has been doing with VR and motion capture and AI, how are we going to archive that? You can only imagine. That just makes the conversation kind of stop for a bit, because that's just a certain level of money and expertise and time that's just a little high. And then likewise, in another part of the world, for myself, there was this track where my choreography was coming together with medical humanities. And medical humanities is already quite broad. And even within medical humanities, I think I really only fit under narrative medicine. But basically, how do you tell the history of a body, of the lived experience of a person, not just in terms of how the bones and muscles work, but their social interactions with the rest of the world, or things like how people in the 50s experienced having cancer versus people in the 90s versus people now. And obviously we are currently in a situation where this will probably be very important and relevant when we look back on this time period. But you know, basically one of the key things in there was the question of things like oral history, because oral history also changes a lot. It used to be a text, and now it's more of an audio, and then it turned to an audio recording. And then they started doing video recording. And then they started thinking, oh, gestures, facial expressions, these are important too. And so now you have places like University of Southern California, where they've made entire VR experiences of Holocaust survivors, so that you can see their whole body as they share their oral history. So because of things like that, and then because of places, so I have to really make a shout out here. The Center for Dance Research at Coventry University is really doing some very interesting things all across, not just dance research, but for VR and motion capture. And so in terms of pure dance preservation, the HoloDance consortium, so it includes other universities in Europe, that is a really interesting project. But what another member of CDARE did was initiate the Somatic Practices and Chronic Pain Network. And in that group, a lot of interesting questions came up about, well, how do you translate somatic practices, which is very internal to the body, into the VR? And do you need motion capture to do this? Do you need other things? So that's, I think, how I ended up going into this question of embodied memory. How do you preserve embodied memories? But then, of course, as you go deeper, you end up also doing other projects and coming up with other ideas. So unfortunately, there's no good conclusion yet. This is just sort of an idea of what goes on in my head on any given day, the questions I ask myself. And I think the most important thing I wish to emphasize is, number one, the body remembers. And I know that's the name of a book as well, and it refers to trauma. But I put it as a way of saying the body remembers sometimes what the mind forgets. And the other thing I often wonder about is when will we get haptics and really achieve like full embodiment in VR? And finally, at any given time in any medium, who is qualified to tell the story? And this has been a really big question for me because I realized that a number of the VR experiences about disability or illness are not always made by the person whose lived experience is being used. And I wondered, well, why not? Are they being exploited or are they unable to? Why are they not named as a collaborator? And actually, when I think about it, I was really happy to see the part about the artist interview, because again, at Purdue, one of the most important steps for the data curation profile was to talk to who generated the data. And, you know, in this case, I'm thinking, wow, if we are trying to archive these interesting VR experiences about people who were not named as the collaborator, but generated the story, generated the data, are we not missing a very important component of that project? So right now, the only conclusions I do have is that it's important to try to capture what the body says, but also to be open-minded about how to visualize it. I don't always agree with using human avatars or using realistic human avatars, because maybe that is not the best representation. And also what I like about VR over video is VR gives the viewer a chance to choose. Do I want to look at it from here? Do I want to look at it from here? Do I want to get inside? Do I want to go outside? I mean, I also realize the programmer has some decision-making power, but the fact that VR allows for this, I think is nice. But I still really worry because there are so many different potential viewing experiences. Do we preserve the experience or do we preserve the project? And this was the same problem that came up in dance archives all the time. What are we actually preserving? And I don't know that there's a good answer. So as an example, this is from my PhD project, and the mannequins are all in positions that I recorded from my own memories. And it's pretty simple, but there was a very good reason for keeping it simple, which was I was also thinking at the time, oh my goodness, how am I going to preserve this? I didn't really want to make anything too complicated because I also wanted to port it to other platforms and things like that. Now, a more complicated project that I am really rushing to finish right now involves lasers. And we are envisioning it as a laser installation. But it's a little bit funny because actually all the lasers, they are driven by motion capture data that I generated from a dance piece. And the project has turned out to be very interesting because actually I cannot look at that mocap data without remembering all the chronic pain and fatigue I had at the time. So embedded in that laser light is actually all this memory of pain and exhaustion. And so for me to kind of touch the light is kind of like touching my own memory. And so now I've been also wondering, okay, how do we preserve this? And I think I got some ideas now from Joyce's presentation, but it's kind of an interesting way of thinking about it. The other thing I wanted to mention, the reason why I put this in is because I realized quite often when we talk about extended reality, we are talking unidirectionally. So from the physical into the digital. But in this case, since we have gone from physical into the digital, and now we are coming back out into the physical to do something that cannot happen easily or naturally in reality, it's making me start to wonder about the directionality of extended reality. And then finally, just today, I got approval for a project that I cannot really talk about yet, but I mention it because it's going to take place in the metaverse. And then that made one more alarm bell about preservation go off. So basically, I started at one point, which is what kind of embodied memories can be preserved. But now I'm starting to think about, could I use the metaverse to make an archive of embedded memories? Oh, but then, like, what are we actually preserving then? It's become a real chicken and egg. So at this point, again, I really don't know what I am, other than I cannot detach anymore the preservation questions from the process of creation. So if anybody has any extra questions, there's my email address. Always happy to answer questions. And thank you.
Thank you, Eugenia, for this very informative and inspiring presentation. So now we will move to the Q&A section. If any of the audience would have any question, please feel free to put in the Q&A or in the chat box, or like, I think you can raise your hand and I can let you talk. So maybe let me start with some of the questions I prepared first. So my first question would be a simple one. How did you start to work with extended reality? Would Eugenia or Joyce would like to go first?
Yeah, I can go first because I think I didn't cover it in my presentation that I have to admit that this project is my one-time VR experience, production experience. For others, it's more like as a gamer, I play some VR game. And I think the reason that in first place that we choose virtual reality is kind of like it's not chosen by myself. And looking back in 2018, it's the time when virtual reality technology started to have its like a second explosion, and all the market is talking about it. And it's the time that our government in Taiwan started to give funding, when whatever you do about virtual reality will be funded. So that is the first reason why the Concept Museum of Fine Art is so highly attached to virtual reality. And then I was just invited as a researcher to do something for the opening of the museum. So it is basically really similar to how artist Yalun was forced to invite it and to do something for that big space. But it ended up quite pretty well, and it does influence a lot of my practice as a conservator now. Yeah.
So I think it's a little hard to answer the question in the sense of, you know, if you studied 3D animation, if you played MMORPGs, were you already involved with extended reality? In terms of making my own VR, I first started in 2018, but it was strange because I had to fly to Australia, Taiwan, Canada, UK to get all my actual training, like to talk to people, to try equipment, to really learn. Because in 2018, it was hard to find actually anybody who was an expert in the type of VR that I wanted to make. I mean, I will be honest, yes, Jeffrey Shaw was technically my co-supervisor at School of Creative Media. And I know that here he is sort of considered one of the experts, the main experts for cultural heritage, VR, and mocap. But, it's not like today, where you can walk into the University of Hong Kong's library and they have 2 VR stations set up for the students. And, the Sandbox just had a webinar for them, And when I think about that, I think, wow, a lot has changed in 4 years alone in Hong Kong. So another note I have to say is it's really hard to work on VR by yourself. All the projects that I see that are really good have a really big team. One of my other advisors here, Kaho Yu, I know that one of the reasons why his film is taking so long, or has taken so long, is because he basically, I think, does almost everything by himself, which is really sort of unheard of, if you ask me.
Thank you. I think it is exciting because for me, it is exciting to study this topic because it is still a field that pretty much developing rapidly every day. So it is very interesting to know what people are doing right now. And you can always learn something new when you just ask this question. So I think that's why we have the forum today. One of the reasons is that it is a very exciting topic and field to talk about. And my second question is, so both of you have shared about the project you've done or you're working right now. In combining, and interestingly, both of you work with archive and also with recreating artwork or recreating experience with virtual reality. So in combining the concept of preservation and extended reality, what do you find the most challenging in your practices? Would anyone like to go first? Okay, Joyce, please.
I can go first. So for this question, I think the biggest challenge is to keep up with the technology and to admit that it will never end. And in some point, I might not ever have the ability to keep up. And it's not only because everyone have their limited of time and all those resources, and just look at how technology is evolving right now, and it will only require more and more resources and the team to simply keep up. I think this is one point. And another point is, as a conservator, I'm always thinking when I'm facing a collection, I have to think about its past and then to predict its future. But if I could not understand how it's going to happen in the future, and also for artwork conservation, the future is not only 5 years. We have to think about 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, and no one can tell what's going to happen 100 years later. And just to think about that, it makes me sometimes is quite frustrated. And so for another point is that I have some shared experience with quite a few also time-based media art conservator that we are struggling of, are we a conservator or not? I think just like Eugenia, that I do find myself sometimes thinking like a curator, like a conservator. Am I conserving it? What am I conserving it? But we still call ourselves a conservator. So when we speak to traditional discipline, like paper conservation, sometimes they will think that, oh, this is not conservation ethic, you are breaking some rules. And it's really hard to explain, digital thing has multiple copy and there's no really master, there's not a true authentic one. So sometimes you have to put a lot of energy on communication and find identity of myself Yeah.
I'm laughing because I remembered, a time when I was working as a digital archivist, and there was always so many questions because, in physical processing, when you have a paper collection, it's already a lot just to go down to folder level. But as a digital archivist, you have to go down to item level. And already that caused so many points of confusion. I think the hardest thing is actually to take my own advice. And the reason why I say that is, so 10 years ago, I ran an experiment on myself to create a sort of preservation process for as I create. And, it seemed very good at the time. But then within 3 years, when I was actually running a dance company, I realized I couldn't follow the process I had designed for myself. And then now I look at the works I make or the research I do, and yes, the advice that I was giving as a librarian or the process I had designed for myself, I don't have the time, I don't have the space, I don't have the money to do any of those things. And yes, I also keep wondering, like, I don't know, how many times can you keep migrating something? You put something in the cloud, but how do you know that that company won't go out of business? And also, I remembered looking at some really like old new media art on like CD-ROM from like the early 90s in like 2012, 2013. And the context, it was just even hard to understand the work because of context. And so how do you preserve the context? But yes, there's a scholar in the US named Colin Post who specializes in doing preservation of new media artists. And he and I have quite often discussing how he was like, yeah, I don't know, because he himself was originally a new media artist. He's like, I don't know how to resolve this issue. So yeah, I don't know.
Yes, we have an attendee who raised his hand. It's Dr. Sunny Lam. I will promote him to speak right now. Hi, Dr. Lam. Can you like speak? Is it okay?
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me now? Yeah. I'm Dr. Sunny Lam. Yeah. Indeed, I am the assessors from ADC. Yeah, but I want to join the sharing and discussion a little bit. Yeah, I'm a professor in creative arts. Yeah, and so I did my first VR probably in 1995 or 1994. I mainly used the QuickTime VR. But so I just want to raise up that first of all, as Joyce mentioned, yeah, probably for your generation, you need to keep up to learn new technology. But that is and not only the artwork production, but also the archiving process is a kind of continuous process. I'm more than happy to see you take the roles to do that. Yeah, every year, every stage, we need to have the artists or the curators to do something like that. Sometimes quite frustrating. Yeah, you may archive many things in digital video in any particular formats, but then the technology change and you have to update them, do the iterations and keep up. But to be honest, I'm old enough to say that that process is important, a part of the human history as well. But we never know, probably maybe that should not happen. Human history will end. The technology will end probably. But anyway, we have the role to keep it. That's why we are still living. Yeah, so don't worry. To be honest, as a media artist, I already stopped to learn many new technologies. Mainly do some research and documentation in terms of writing. But I think different people have different roles. Yeah, so you keep your roles and you'll change in different stages as well. Thank you very much for your hard work. And of course, the VR technology change as well. Yeah, I think right now that kind of using the 3D animation or some 3D the new technologies to capture the virtual reality. I think that's why make the NFT possible now. A lot of things that is very important. There is some kind of very early, like my friends Kathy Hyde, the new media artist in New York. Many of their works, yeah, some of them are still recorded in video. Yeah, but a lot in interactive format too. Yeah, and for Eugenia, you are a PhD student. No, you mentioned your PhD. But anyway, I think I'm not. I have never been a dancer. that is your experience, and I think that kind of embodied memories should be very clear from the experience from the dancers. But I think I don't know why I have the question for you. But why you what do you think? What is the reason you keep changing from multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary to the transdisciplinary? What is the reason? To be honest, I think you need to think very clearly. You need to know about that. You can't say I don't know. You need to find out the reasons to go forward for yourself. Right? Yeah. What was the reason you have a lot of different concept and idea? Why? What is the trajectory or the direction you want to go? Can you share?
So I thought I put it on my slide, but I completed my PhD in 2020. And right now, I guess you could say I'm a freelance researcher. It's just a little hard to do certain projects if you're working full time. And I think the reason for the transformation is simply because of necessity. If you think in a certain way, then you cannot find the answers to certain problems. So for example, if you are exploring machine learning as a component of AI, and you want to think about what kind of body would a machine generate for itself based on its own movement practice. All right, right there, you're already drawing upon computer science, you're drawing upon philosophy, you're drawing upon dance, other movement practices, biological sciences. And then the final result, though, where does the final result exist? Does it exist in the arts? Does it exist in the health sciences? Does it exist in computing sciences? In this case, the idea of a machine deciding its own body, it kind of exists outside of any one discipline. And it has implications for our future, because right now, researchers decide an AI's body for it, either through robotics or through an avatar or something like that. But actually, if we are really to try to reach the so-called singularity in 2030 and really actualize AI and the potential of extended reality, honestly, then we have to start thinking more broadly that a machine might start defining itself. And I think there are companies like Charisma.ai, which uses the GPT-3 engine for generating speech. And it's become extremely realistic. And what they've done that's so great that relates back to here is you can plug it into Unity or Unreal and use it to power an avatar in VR and therefore have a more realistic experience or natural experience. But the solutions for these kind of solutions if you, again, you have to go back and look at the very specific, strict academic definitions of mono, cross, multi, inter, etc., to see why it's very careful. You have to be careful about what approach you're taking, because in some cases, the end result is intended to live within a single discipline. In some cases, the result is intended to start a new interdiscipline. In some cases, the result is not meant to have any social significance at all. In some cases, the whole point is to solve something like climate change. So it's more of like I would say the choice of disciplinary mentality is more like having an internal framework. So when I first started choreographing, I just thought pretty movement on stage. But now the way I'm looking at it is not necessarily working in dance, but just what does it mean to move as a human and as a non-human? Hope that helps.
Thank you, Eugenia. We are kind of running out of time. We still have 5 minutes. I can continue with the question I prepared, or if anyone has questions, please feel free to throw it out. And so my next question, I will keep it quick. My next question is, since we're talking about preservation / conversation / archiving and reenacting the experience or movement or like an artwork with virtual reality, do you think like the preservation and the reenactment, do you think these two aspects overlap in some way?
Sorry, I'll just try to answer quickly, because also I want to highlight a friend of mine. One of my former classmates, Dr. Feishuan Xu, she was working with a silkworm artist in China, Liang Shaoji. And we actually have a plan to do a project together to preserve one of his works using VR, because there's a really big issue. He uses live silkworms. It's a huge ethical and ecological and many other logistical concerns are in there. So in that sense, we looked at VR as being able to not only reenact the artwork or the experience itself, but it's really the only way to conserve it, because you cannot keep silkworms alive forever.
Okay. For me, there's definitely overlapping, and I did mention that when with the project with the VR that I created, then the next question is, how are we going to make it accessible and preservable for the future generation? So there is this constantly loop in, you create something and you put it in VR for preservation purpose, and then and the next step is how do you preserve this virtual reality content? And so for the Digital Art Foundation, I think we have a next project is to how to put all the artwork that was exhibited in the concept art museum can be like accessible to everyone, just simply in front of your screen. But this cannot be like I just put what the audience looking at into on the web. There has to be over like what I was been doing, like knowing the artwork. And so there is this constantly loop, and we haven't figured out how to deal with each artwork one by one and then have a uniform platform for every artwork can be accessible to everyone and still stays the most authentic art experience as it was. And I like to point out a final my own opinion about what does it mean as a preservation. Since I think I kind of benefit by not trained as a conservator, because I like to think that there is one side is a social memory, what you want the people, want the society that we are living in right now to remember. And on the other side is that museum thinking about the storage, how to preserve all the bit and the file. I'm always trying to think toward the social memory. So that is how when I have the opportunity to present the project and to introduce the artwork again, I will still see it as a type of preservation, and then let more people to understand the work, but just through different type of format. Yeah.
Thank you, Joyce and Eugenia. And my last question is, do you think there more can be done with extended reality in terms of preservation?
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to that artificial intelligence can be implemented to preservation analysis. And as far as I know, that people who were coming from traditional museum training and conservation training, I think also for myself, a part of myself, we are not very, very good at computer science and AI and data analysis, this kind of stuff. But if we think as everything that is born digital, it is recorded by computer itself automatically, and it can be maybe self-preserved by an intelligence that can give me advice about my next step without still keeping in mind that, oh, I have a VR artwork in my storage, I have to keep it up, open it for every year, twice a year, etc. So yeah, that is just like my future hope, and I hope maybe in the future I could have some like company or partner to work with that.
I just want to jump in and say, I think the digital humanities community around the world has been doing a lot. Yeah, I think the question, it comes back a little bit down to what is defined as extended reality, though, because I'm thinking, well, are we preserving the Sword of Damocles original headset that was developed in the mid-20th century? Is that part of the act of preservation? And, you know, when we say art preservation, again, yes, are we preserving the experience of viewing the work? Are we preserving the components needed to reproduce the work? Can we preserve the context that the work was made and shown in? I think the question of what can be done with extended reality, again, yes, depends on, because the technology itself that is counted as extended reality has also changed a lot. We didn't used to have augmented reality. We didn't used to have mixed reality. We didn't used to have AI that as the way we have it now. Blockchain has also changed things a lot. So I don't know. I know there's a preservation summit coming up soon at IZEA in June, but I don't know if they'll have enough time to actually discuss all of that, to be honest.
Yes. And I think that's why this is so important. We have the conversation like today when we can talk about the questions, and also to communicate with the public or interested audiences about like the question we have or the vision that we hope for like how archiving or how extended reality that can be in the future. So again, thank you very much, Joyce and Eugenia, for joining the VMAC Forum today and give your amazing presentation. We have really learned a lot today, like at least for me. And thank you so much for everyone attending VMAC Forum today. And also thank you, Dr. Sunny Lam, for your question. And it is really lovely to have this conversation with you before like the Chinese New Year. And thank you so much. And hopefully we'll see you next time very soon. And a Happy New Year. Thank you so much.
Happy New Year.